Hello and welcome to today's masterclass from Country Navigator. My name is Andrew Wright. I can see that people are just starting to join us. It's very, very nice to have you here today. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day. Let me start just by doing a little bit of admin. We're going to be asking you to click on some links today to open up your browser. We're going to be sharing some graphics with you, and we're also going to be sharing some video content. But I'll be here to guide you through this 1-hour masterclass on the subject of cross-border working. And I see our attendance numbers are starting to click up as you all rush out of one meeting and into another. So while you do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Andrew Wright, and I'm delighted to be working once again with Country Navigator. I'm talking to you today from a very quiet corner of the English countryside. I live in southwest Oxfordshire in an area called the Vale of the White Horse, which is as English and pretty as you might imagine. So it's just coming up to early to mid-afternoon here. It's just gone 2 o'clock. My background is simply this. I'm a communication, leadership, and cultural trainer and coach. My career started at the age of 16 when I was still at school, when I took an unpaid post at the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. I've spent the past 35 years, that makes me 51 if my maths is correct, as a media professional. I was a broadcaster for 10 years internationally, living overseas, a writer, a producer, a consultant, and for the last 20 years, a media company owner. So I'm also a boss. I hire people from this country and from many countries around the world. I also work as a skills coach and consultant in a job I've had, again, for around 20 years. That leads me to work with a broad range of large multinational organizations. I'm a former expat myself and have personally, my belief is in a committed approach to cross-cultural relationships. I try and keep a cross-cultural mindset whenever I'm working with anybody, because culture is not just about flags and nationalities. It's about you, your experiences, and how they differ from someone who might live in the next door house to you. So that's a little about me. In our session today, I'm going to open up the chat box. If you don't have it open in Zoom, the great thing about it is it'll ping out as a separate window. I'm going to type in a quick hello here. I'd like you to feel free to drop a message or a comment in at any point in our conversation. And I'm going to keep one eye on that box and make sure that your thoughts are a valid and important part of our conversation today. It is a conversation as much as possible. And let me also introduce you from speaking to us today from Brooklyn, New York City, my producer, Luke. And Luke is just giving you a wave on camera now, and he's going to be helping me drop links, play videos in. Say hi, Luke.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I'm glad to be with the group today. If you need any technical assistance, please reach out to me in the chat.
Thank you, Luke. Doesn't he have a beautiful voice as well? I've never told him that. So our subject today is cross-border working. So let's start by digging into that. We're going to be looking at it quite specifically. How do we change cultural differences from a problem to an advantage? The turn that frown upside down approach, as it was once called. We're also going to be looking at how we can use a rather valuable tool that Country Navigator offer called World Prism. And we'll use that, we'll show how we can use that to leverage diversity within your teams, to highlight it and show us how we can use it to our advantage. Or to coin a phrase that Michael Caine, the actor Michael Caine, once said, and this was a piece of advice he was given by a director: when you're on stage and something goes wrong, don't stop and complain. Use the difficulty to your advantage. Great piece of advice. The final thing we're going to try and do is find some tools for you to take away today. This isn't just a seminar. Let's do some coaching. Let's find some ideas that you can take away to your afternoon, your evening, or your morning, wherever you are in the world. And these will be adaptive strategies and something called a team charter, which I think is fascinating and could be invaluable. We'll talk about that a little later. And these can help you manage difference in a culturally intelligent way. All right. So let's get started. What I'd like to do, Luke is going to drop a URL into the chat box. I see that there's an issue with people not being able to see me. So I've just changed a setting. You should now be able to see my quick hi in the box. Could you please click on this link? Now, for those of you who know about Mural, you know where we're going. This is going to open up a link in your web browser, taking you to this really great piece of graphical interactive software. On here, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions during our session, and I'm going to invite you to click on one of the empty post-it notes that you will see on the screen. And if there isn't a post-it note there, we can create one. And in those post-it notes, we can drop our comments. And your comments in Mural are often some of the best parts of our sessions. You don't have to speak. You can stay anonymously behind your deactivated cameras, but you can write your ideas, and they will be an invaluable part of what we're about to talk about. So what I'd like to do is ask you a question as you join Mural. I'd like you to tell me some of the challenges you face when you work across borders. And let's think about that phrase, working across borders. They may be geographical borders. They may be cultural borders within a country. They may be borders even within your organization, where one division has a markedly different culture from the other. Now, to get you started on here, if you go over to the menu on the left-hand side, the top icon, if you hover your mouse over it, says sticky note. Click on that. It'll allow you to choose a sticky note of color of your choice, and then click on the note, and in fact, drag it onto the whiteboard as I'm just doing now. And I'm just going to write the word hello in mine and post it, and there is your post-it note on the board. That's it. Pick a post-it note, drag it onto the board, and type your answer. What are some of your challenges that you face when you work across borders, whether they be national, whether they be local, whether they be cultural or other? Let's take your interpretation of the word borders and see where we go with that. All right, we're starting to get some ideas coming in here. I see Pauline is in Mural. Thank you, Pauline, for joining us in there. And this particular post-it note here, which is unfolding, says the main challenge is to ensure people see me as an individual and not a representative of my country. That is a really fascinating note. This, of course, perhaps hints, and you can clarify this for me if you like, at our often, forgive the word, the use of the word lazy, the use of stereotyping. It would be easy to see me as an Englishman. I was born in Liverpool. I grew up in the UK, specifically in the country of England. There are stereotypes about Liverpool, which I certainly found difficult when I was leaving that part of the country at the age of 18. I have had stereotypes about being English, thrown at me kindly, gently, sometimes unkindly, which I find too very unhelpful. Let's go over to this note here. There are communication nuances. What a lovely phrase. There are differences in the way we communicate across borders. I lived in Germany at the beginning of my career, and I'll share one quick story with you as you type your particular challenges across borders. Please carry on typing so we can share your ideas. My biggest challenge was turning up in Germany at the age of 21 to start a job as a broadcaster to a British community. Walking into the radio station, which was full of British people in the middle of a German town. One of the rooms in the building was staffed purely by German engineers because that was part of the contract for being in country. I go and say, hello, 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 small talk, small talk, small talk. Let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about my journey over. Very English, some would say. And then I walk into the room full of engineers. And this is my first encounter of working full-time with people from another country. And I say, hello, how are you? I try to engage in small talk and chit chat. I get about one word out of each of these gentlemen before they lower their heads back to their desk and carry on fixing whatever it is they're fixing. And this went on for 2 weeks. I couldn't get a conversation started until someone said, these guys are here to work. If you want to talk to them, grab them on their lunch break or talk to them on the way into the office. But when they're in the office, they are here to work. And as someone said, it's very German. Of course, that in itself was a stereotype. But that was a challenge I faced working across borders that was really, really tricky for me. I had to learn. I had to open my mind. A few more here. Communicating feedbacks. Thank you for this one. Open feedbacks are taken as criticism, and that can differ across different cultures. Maybe this is about our approach towards direct and indirect communication modes. In the UK, we're generally speaking fairly indirect. In Germany, Poland especially, way up to Scandinavia, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, far more direct, polite but direct. The same in the Netherlands. So sometimes feedback might seem fine to you, but doing it across a cultural border where communication styles are different can cause real problems. I work a lot in feedback and conflict management, more about that later, and I come across this problem constantly. It's a great note. There are different priorities, different time zones. Let me zoom in on this one. Discounting the importance of cultural difference. Yeah, there's just the fact that some people, through lack of awareness or knowledge or education, are not aware that the difference is not just a national flag or a different location. There are cultural differences between many of us in this room and many people who you might be working with. And I think it's important to understand that not everybody understands those differences exist. Thank you. Stereotyping, trying not to be rude. Let's see if I've missed anything. Oh, there's something over here. Someone's just still typing. Internal communication can differ. Now, let's say you work in a multinational company or even just a pan-European country. Think of the number of cultures that exist on a Teams chat or in your Slack conversations or in whatever email reply all conversation you're in or in a face-to-face meeting. And imagine the nuances and differences between those people and how a small difference of understanding can turn into a big challenge for your business. And there's one over here. I just want to, this one's hiding behind a window. Here we go. Some words do not have the same meaning. I like this. Interesting in the UK plus other communication nuances. Yes. So if someone comes to me with an idea in this country, this isn't my style, but let me demonstrate this. And they say, Andrew, I think it would be best for our business if we painted our company car bright yellow, we added neon lights to it, and we put our name, we wrapped the car in our name and played loud music from the roof. I'm going to be very English. I'm going to lean into that person and say, it's a really interesting idea. Why don't we hold on to that and come back to it? And what I've just said is, no, that's a terrible idea, but I don't want to be rude because politeness is generally something that a lot of people in England and in the home nations like to adopt as a way of reacting to something that might be bad. Perhaps if I was in Denmark with my wife's relatives, they would say, Andrew, that's a terrible idea. They do it with good humor, but they'd get straight to the point. That's a really lovely point. So we've opened our conversation. Let me tell you now, and keep on populating that board, by the way, that's going to be available through the session as we move through. Let me talk to you about Peter Drucker. He's famous for saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's kind of a heavy quote. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, this means that no matter how well designed your strategic plan is, it will fall flat if you overlook culture. So culture is a big roadblock for even the best strategy, potentially. Culture influences outcomes. It determines discretionary effort. It influences management styles, and it defines how both employees and customers interact with each other, and they interact with the organization. So it's pretty broad in its influence. The thing is, we're used to talking about culture as something that creates problems and challenges. Look, I set you up with that question just now. What challenges do you face when you cross borders? So that's quite a negative conversation, isn't it? Obviously there are challenges, but should we only talk about challenges? What if we look at it in a different way? What if we reinterpret those differences as something, well, a place where potential lies, where opportunity exists, not just problems and challenges, but opportunities, chances to do something positive. Let's take predictions as an example. Might not sound like a topic that belongs here, but predictions are central to the decisions we make in everyday life and work. A guy called Jack Soll. He's a psychologist at Duke University. Now, his colleagues analyzed 28,000 forecasts by professional economists. I would not like to be a professional economist right now. If you are one, please tell me a reason why I would want to do that. It's a tough time to be an economist, or maybe it's exciting. Maybe I need that insight. Now, the first finding showed that the top forecaster within that sample group was around 5% more accurate than the average forecaster. And maybe that's not surprising to you. Some economists are just better performers than others. But then Sol thought of something else. He thought, instead of looking at individual predictions, he took the average prediction of the top 6 economists. He placed their forecasts in some sort of a team and looked at the average of their predictions, their collective judgment. He then checked if this prediction was more accurate than the top ranked economists. Now, we're not talking about simple tasks here, because a simple task will be done quicker by the fastest person. They don't need collective wisdom. It would slow them down. But what happened when he flipped the analysis and looked at complex problems? I'm going to share a graphic with you here to help me tell this story. Bear with me 1 second, and here we go. So let's have a little look at this graphic on the screen right now. When Sol compared the collective judgment of 6 economists with the judgment of the top economist, it was not less accurate. So it was not less accurate. It was more accurate, and not just by a little bit, not just by 1 or 2 percentage points. It was more accurate by 15%. That's a huge, huge difference. And it's so large that it shocked the researchers. Numbers clearly showed that combining different perspectives or frames of reference created a more comprehensive picture. I think that's a really interesting example. Group wisdom emerges whenever information is dispersed among different minds, different perspectives, diversity of opinion, diversity of viewpoint. They were all economists, but a diversity of inputs gave a more accurate reading than the top economist alone. I think that's a really interesting example. So let's go to chat. I see there's some great admin. Luke, thanks for your support here with people who are just having a couple of challenges on Mural. But let me go to chat and ask you a question. Please drop a number in. This is a fun game. Drop a number in that answers this question. First of all, let me be cross-cultural here. I'm about to use the phrase the London Underground. This isn't some shady English group. The London Underground is our subway, our metro. It's our underground rail network in the City of London. How long in miles, sorry for those of you in the metric system, how long in miles do you think the London Underground is? Thanks for backing that up. Luke's dropped that question in. Please type your answer in chat. Give me your number. How long in miles do you think the London Underground is? There's some thinking, and now there's some typing. Matthew, thank you. Matthew's opening with a number of 280. Will you be steered by Matthew's guess? Will he create bias? Will he influence your number, or will it be different? Now, Annalise, 9,000 miles. Well, I know somebody who's traveled every single mile of the London Underground. He's a friend of a friend. I don't think he has much else going on in his life, but he did it as a dare and created a YouTube video. 9,000 miles, that would have been one heck of an achievement. Let's see some of the other numbers. So we've gone from Matthew's 280 to Annalise 9,000. Thank you. Renan, am I pronouncing your name right? Renan or Renan? Do excuse me. 550 miles. Okay, Swastik, you're saying more than 1,000. Isabella, excuse me, 300 miles. Tanya, 400. Fernando, 250. Laura Meyer, 800. That still leaves us, Annalise, you're still the highest guess with 9,000 miles. Maybe there's that many miles of sewerage under London, but that's a different question. So what we've got here is a diversity of answers. If anyone fancies doing this, and this might be really, really interesting, would anyone like to take all the numbers that we've just heard? Although I think Annalise might throw us on this one. Throw them into a calculator and work out the average. There's a slightly nerdy challenge for someone. If anyone would like to do that, I'd be interested. So put all the data points in and then divide by the number of different data samples that you've used. If there's 10, divide by 10. And someone give me an answer. Let's see if this works out. Now, I don't have time to calculate your collective prediction in the way we talked about in our previous example, the graph that's still up on screen. But when researcher Scott Page asked his students for their guesses of the length of the London Underground, their collective prediction was 249 miles. That was their collective prediction. So how close is that to the real answer? Has anybody done the average of ours? Has anyone looked at the collective prediction yet? I wonder. Let's see if that number comes up. We'll come back to it. The length of the London Underground is actually, in fact, we have a winner. Fernando, you guessed perfectly. Now, either Google helped or you have a great insight. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say you just got a great mind. It's actually 250 miles. The collective prediction by our researcher here, Scott Page, was 1 mile off. And our conclusion here is diversity often has great value. So how do we turn cultural differences from pain, from challenge, from problems into an advantage? How, as Michael Caine puts it, do we use the difficulty? All right, how about a useful tool? Let's look at a framework. So how about the cultural intelligence framework, or we call it the CQ framework. CQ is our abbreviation for cultural quotient, like IQ, intelligence quotient, or EQ for emotional. CQ is cultural quotient, and we call it cultural intelligence. Let's have a look at a framework. It's the key, these 4 points, to working across borders and turning differences from pain to an advantage. So here are the 4 points. Number 1, attitude. Openness to the importance of change and the value of difference is key. So that's openness to the importance of and value of difference. Difference is good. And that's a big step for many people walking into the world of cultural intelligence. Difference is good. The attitude of humility that your cultural perspective is not universal. Not everybody feels the same way. Now, number 2 is awareness, self-awareness and other awareness. We need to understand our own values and principles and recognize other people's as well. Using the Country Navigator tool World Prism, we can, and a profile on World Prism, we can identify your cultural drivers. So we have this tool with which we can do it. A number of the people on our session today have used this tool and gone through an assessment. I'm one of them. It was really interesting what it showed me about myself. The third aspect is knowledge. So we've had attitude, awareness, now knowledge. Learning about other people's cultural preferences. Learning about the behaviors and the defaults of others. Not just the do's and don'ts, although they're good to know as well, but looking at the underlying values and attitudes in the World Prism's Teams tool. So again, we're back to World Prism. It can teach us a lot about ourselves and others. This knowledge can come from a tool like World Prism. Finally, skills. So here we need to look at things like listening, empathy, curiosity, and flexibility. We'll talk about those later, but I will say in that first day I described earlier on, Luke's dropped in the 4 titles: attitude, awareness, knowledge, and skills. They're in chat. You can have a look at them. That first day I talked to you about earlier on in Germany, at the age of 21, my first job in broadcasting. I was very young, very naive. I was reasonably traveled at the age of 21, but I think I had some catching up to do on many of my peers. I remember learning very, very quickly to walk into a new place and spend as much time listening as possible, watching, observing. How are things done here? How does it work here? What's different here? That was important. Then empathy. Empathy tells us a lot about people. And it's an incredibly transferable skill. Curiosity was what drove me to have the courage to say, this looks different here. How does this work? I hope you don't mind me asking this question. The way I pay for fuel in Germany is slightly different. There was a token scheme through my company. Or what day do I put my bins out? Oh, you don't put them out on a Sunday. I don't know if that's still the case. This was 30 years ago. And most importantly, a skill I learned when I spent a few years in the Royal Air Force Reserves as a British Forces Reserve in the UK. This was maybe around the age of 39 for me. And it was called Max Flex in the forces. And it means maximum flexibility. And it tells us that in any situation, you might make the world's best plan, but as soon as you put that plan into action, it will immediately break. Something will immediately go wrong. I think we all know that from our corporate backgrounds as well. And what's important is having a maximum amount of flexibility available. Be ready to change things. Don't be stuck in the way you've done things, with the way you look at things, your attitudes and behaviors. Be open to change. So that's the CQ framework. Okay, how about talking a little bit more about World Prism? Because this is a practical tool that we could go and use today as a team. We could use this right now to learn more about each other and our team dynamic. So let's introduce the model. It's a great tool to build awareness and knowledge about cultural preferences. Luke's going to take over for a second. We're going to look at a video, and the video tells the story of World Prism. Let's roll the tape, Luke. Enjoy.
Two fish are swimming through the ocean when they hit a different current. One turns to the other and says, "The water's a bit cold today." The other fish replies, "What's water?" One of the biggest challenges of culture is that, like a fish in water, we don't notice the very thing that has such a huge impact on everything we do and think and say. Country Navigator developed the World Prism model of culture to help reveal the invisible. It's a framework which will help you to examine culture and identify your own cultural preferences and the preferences of those around you. World Prism gives you an objective, scientific way to examine culture that can help you leverage cultural differences as a positive force. World Prism starts with cultural intelligence at the center. Cultural intelligence impacts on the three key areas of interpersonal interaction: relating, regulating, reasoning. Relating is how we work with others. Regulating is how we manage others. And reasoning, how we think and persuade others. These three R's underpin everything. We're going to take a whistle-stop tour of each of the three dimensions that make up the three R's. Firstly, the relating dimensions. Task or relationship deals with your fundamental approach to collaboration and where your priorities are. Is your priority the task, leaving the relationship to come, or do you prefer to build a relationship up before you start on the task? Those with an explicit approach can be characterized by the saying, "I mean what I say and I say what I mean." They take the primary meaning of the words said. They are direct and can use a lot of words to avoid doubt. Implicit communicators look for meaning in the context between and around the words said. They place a lot of emphasis on subtleties of meaning, power relationships, and body language. They may say less and appear to be quieter. Individual-oriented people rely on themselves. They identify themselves separately from those around them, are self-motivated, and collaborate in order to advance their own interests. They prefer to make decisions themselves and avoid dependence on others. Those with a group orientation thrive around others. They are aware of their own limits and expect others to cover their weaker areas. They look for consensus in decisions and expect to be informed around wider events and tasks. The three regulating dimensions start with a tight, loose scale, which relates to perception of time. A tight perception sees time as a commodity with value. The amount of time you give shows the value you assign. Deadlines are important, and wasting time and interruptions are not welcomed. A loose view of time sees time as flexible. You need to adapt to circumstances, and a deadline can only be a guide or an intention. Often the journey is as important as the destination. A shared culture is one that sees power as distributed according to talent and ability. A good leader knows their limitations and brings in experts to support their decision making. The best hierarchies are flat, and formality can slow things down. At the other end of the scale, concentrated cultures have steep hierarchies, with power kept close. Leaders are more likely to have power from their connections and will closely guard information to maintain control. Status symbols and formalities are important. The final set of reasoning dimensions focuses on how we think about problems and present solutions. Those who take a linear approach prefer structured, logical approaches to finding solutions, examining each element in sequence to find improvements. The circular thinkers prefer to step back and think around the challenge, looking at it from different perspectives, taking their time to consider as many alternatives as possible. A facts-oriented thinker is an evidence gatherer, comfortable with data and interpretation. A thinking orientation is a sign of an approach that looks at models to find general points that can be applied to the specific situation. They are more likely to look for connections between data points and look for patterns. And finally, simple complex. A simple orientation has a preference for concise, high-level arguments that get to the point quickly. An image paints 1,000 words. Short introductions are preferred, followed by a summary argument and clear conclusion. Those with a complex orientation want the details. They want to be convinced that they understand how you came to your recommendation or conclusion and need to understand the background to it, even if that means spending a lot of time. The best way to understand World Prism is to take the self-assessment and start understanding your profile and recognizing others.
That's a fascinating video. Every time I watch that, I take
Andrew,
away.
you're on mute.
Can you guys hear me?
We got you now.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Luke. I was saying that's a fascinating video. I've watched that a number of times. Every time I watch it, I take away a new detail from it. And it actually reminds me of a quick story I'll tell you in a moment. While I tell you that, I'd like to dive onto chat. And I'd like your thoughts and insights in that video. What would be really interesting is for you to share any insights about yourself or someone you're in a professional relationship with that's suddenly made you realize why your colleague is behaving in a certain way. I think that's a really interesting reflection of the video. And I'll give you an example of this. I was coaching a German professional this morning, and she has an interesting relationship with her boss, her line manager. And I was reminded that one of the reasons they have a challenging relationship is because of one of the scales in the reasoning section, simple and concise, the last scale that we actually talked about. She is very quick to make decisions. She wants concise arguments. She assesses risk very, very quickly. But her boss can't quite understand how she's able to make decisions so quickly because he is more complex. He wants more details. He wants the nitty gritty, lovely expression in English. He wants to know the why and the motivation behind every single thing. She sits at the complex, simple end. He sits at the complex. They have a chasm between them. And I've been talking to her about using her empathy to understand that he simply has a different approach towards reasoning. Understanding it will help her to satisfy his curiosity and his need for details. But do you have an insight from listening to that video and looking at the World Prism model of culture that you would like to share? I'd really like to see it in chat. Please feel free to share it. And as I see it, I'll come back to it. Thank you. So let's take tight versus loose as an example here. And at this point, I'm going to be able to bring up a slide in just a moment. Excuse me 1 second. Yeah, okay. I'm going to share my screen again here, just to bring this up as an example. All right, so hopefully that's up on screen now. Here's the tight versus loose scale. We all know someone who can never wait for you to reply to an email, or perhaps you're that person. Perhaps you're the person who cannot wait for a reply. You're the first one to log in on a Teams meeting, perhaps. You're the first to get restless as the time allotted starts to run out. If time is important to you, then it can be hard, to understand people with a loose orientation of time. Perhaps you become frustrated, impatient, intolerant. It's a very human reaction. For you, time is concrete. For them, time is jelly. You can recognize that someone has a loose orientation for time if you listen to how they talk about time. Rather than using precise times, they'll say sometime next week or around Tuesday, maybe, or even I'll see if I can make 4-ish work. Now, I'm tight on that scale. I know I am. I may not be perfect in adhering to it, but my diary looks like a patchwork quilt. And many of you are in the same position. Your days are back to back with meetings, and perhaps you believe in that. You believe in the importance of that tight regime. A loose orientation is not just a symptom of laziness. This is a perception and a stereotype I've heard again and again. Loose does not mean lazy or being disorganized. It's an attitude that time is just an arbitrary number, not something that can be allowed to control you. This is a function of understanding. Once we see that loose doesn't mean lazy, loose doesn't mean disorganized, it is a genuine, culturally different approach towards time. Perhaps we can use our understanding, our empathy, to start seeing that in a more positive way. So, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 in time? 1 being tight, 10 being loose. Give me your score now in chat. Where are you on this tight and loose scale when it comes to time? I'm going to say, so 1 is tight and 10 is loose. I'm going to say I am probably 2 to 3. I think that's where I am. Fernando, you are 3. Thank you. This is where I struggle to keep up with your posts. Thank you for these. Renan, you're a 3 as well. Maybe our diaries would sync up pretty well. We have a 5. Anna, you're an 8. Now I know Anna, and I didn't know that about Anna. There's a really interesting insight. Laura, you're a 4. So maybe empathy is a little easier for you. You're sitting somewhere in the middle. Marianne is a 6. She's starting to move towards that looser end of the scale. Luisa is 3. Tanya, you're a 4. Isabella, a 9. Let's have a conversation with Isabella. Let's get her insight. Isabella, if you don't mind, as you're a 9, as you're a self-declared 9, do you ever feel misunderstood by people who are maybe a 1, a 2, or a 3? Maybe you could share just a quick insight into that. What's your relationship like with people who see time differently from you? Please type an answer if you have a moment. I'd love to hear that. So where you are on the scale, the answers are really, really varied. Thank you for sharing those. And as we're going to, yes, ha, 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 says Isabella. Can you be more specific? I dare you to share us a story without embarrassing or shaming anybody about how that difference between loose and tight has impacted you or affected you or come into your daily life. I can see Isabella now thinking, how do I do this in an anonymous and kind way? Please take your time. Let's go to our second mural. Luke, could we drop the mural link into the chat box, please? This is activity 2. Now these, I'm going to join this as well. Let's go to mural 2. So these are the results you'll see on mural right now. Click on the link, join us, and have a look at number 1 on this mural, tight versus loose orientation. So these are real results from a real team who all went through our World Prism Teams tool. Just have a look at the graph there. It's actually a little bit similar to what we've just had in this room. I think we were more towards the middle and left of the spectrum here, tight to sort of halfway along, with fewer people like our friend Isabella, who were right up there on the 9. That's quite interesting. After we created a team on our platform, and each person completed their World Prism profiles, the World Prism Teams tool did its clever thing. It used this data and it performed a spread analysis, and it shows us the cultural makeup of this particular team, the team on which we're basing this data. So what is the advantage? Here is a question now to answer within Mural. We have some post-it notes underneath our tight versus loose graph. Click on one of these post-it notes and answer this question. What is the advantage of having people across this dimension? That's tight versus loose. Jess, I see your mouse over the wrong one. So let's move left, go over to that first graph, click on a post-it note and tell me your opinion. Why is there an advantage of having people who exist across this world prism dimension of time, tight to loose? How does it help us? What does it give us? Okay, I'm going to zoom in because I'm starting to see some typing coming in. Thank you for that. Dive in, type an opinion. There is absolutely nothing to lose, although I'm just trying to zoom in at the moment and struggling to do so. Here we go. I'm getting a zoom in now. So tight makes sure important deadlines. There we go. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Zooming in. There we go. My zoom in is now working. Ain't technology grand? Okay. So this first note here suggests that being at the tight end of the scale makes sure important deadlines are met. It keeps teams on track. That's a good answer. But of course, the real analysis I'm looking for here, and thank you for that one, is what's the advantage of having people across the dimension? So there's an advantage about having people on the tight end. But what's the bigger picture here? Why is it good to have people who are both tight and loose? That one answer suggests tight helps us with deadlines. But what about loose? Let's go over here. Loose will help flexibility because surprises happen. I really like that. This is this idea I talked to you about earlier on about max flex, having maximum flexibility. Yeah, you need flexibility within the team. Those people are going to deal better potentially with deadlines and timelines suddenly being turned on their head. If you only had tight people, is being typed right now. No pressure on that speed of typing. There would be no flexibility on time. That's a beautiful answer. I'm going to wait for the rest of that. And Laura in chat says, it helps to moderate the extremes. What a lovely one sentence, concise response that is to the question. Thank you, Laura Meyer. It helps to moderate the extremes, which comes back to the idea of diversity. Diversity gives us a number of viewpoints on a number of different issues that enter our working life. And this one is time. Diversity can be really helpful. To finish this note over here, if you only had loose people, deadlines would never be met. You need the tight people to help you with deadlines, the loose people to help you be more flexible about time when that's helpful. Multitasking has come in. I would love to hear the person who's moving the multitasking sticky note. Could you add a little bit more context? Why is multitasking a benefit, part of the benefits of having people across that spectrum? Please add to your answer if you have a moment, if you don't mind. So someone's typed over here on the second mural. You're getting ahead of me. Let's talk about that then. First of all, I'll debrief this mural. Teams with a dominant type preference over on the left-hand side, they have a strong focus on efficiency, punctuality, and deadlines. They're all critical, not just because they provide a cost structure, but they create an overall design in which people can stay focused and provide timely contributions. But a potential drawback of having people just on the tight end can be the creation of arbitrary deadlines that bear little relationship to the work that needs to be developed, or the challenges to be confronted. So having loose people gives you the advantage that people are often strong at multitasking. Thank you so much. That gives us the context of that post-it note. That's great. And let me go back to this. So they help us with people who are strong at multitasking. Let me gather my thoughts. And people who prefer to see events and relationships evolve in an unforced way. No time deadlines. Let's let things brew in a natural way. A quality outcome often takes precedence over hitting a deadline. This can be true. How many of you are working on projects at the moment where you're hitting deadlines and the outcome isn't right yet? I've spoken to 2 people this week who are in that situation right now. And no one's moving the deadline or recognizing the deadline might not need to be arbitrary. That's an interesting point I heard from a coachee. A potential drawback of people on the loose end of the scale might be a lack of discipline in planning and meeting deadlines. So you need the tight people. Diversity is so beneficial in a number of ways, many of which we haven't defined here. Thank you for your post-it notes. And Laura, thank you. That's a great point. Inclusive, diversive teams. The team is able to see the value of working closely to schedules and timelines without losing sight of those occasions when extra time needs to be taken for a quality outcome. A diversity of approaches, a diversity of viewpoints, all fed by a diversity of culture. It's very powerful. Now let's look at example 2 on the same mural. Let's look at task versus relationship. So go back to the mural. Let's do the same thing here. Let's look at, and I'm going to get my Zoom function working again here. Let's go look at task v relationship. We had a really good example of that in the video, if you remember. And I've had lots of examples of this. Working in Abu Dhabi, I had a client in Abu Dhabi, and I turned up, and time was on the loose end of the scale there. And I said, "When's my meeting?" They said, "Sometime tomorrow." And I didn't really know what to do with that. But then I was in country for 3 days to sign a contract. And it turned out we spent those 3 days in the meetings that we had talking about each other's family, talking about our lives, our backgrounds, the things that we're experiencing right now. And then we spent 20 minutes at the end of the 3-day visit and the contract was signed. And it was incredibly nerve-wracking for me. I came and talked to my friend who'd worked in Abu Dhabi and said, "No, that's great. Now they know you. Now they understand who you are." Relationship is a key component of you carrying out this task for them. They need to trust you. They need to know you. They need to understand you. And it was a really valuable lesson for me. And it came in a very, very tense 3 days. But I've moved on and I've become more flexible. I've grown empathy in that particular approach. So let's look at task relationship. Let's now share our opinions on why it is valuable to have a diverse offering in your team when it comes to the relationship between putting task first and putting relationship first. Dive onto the post-its, give me a few more examples, and let's unpack those. It's important to understand that both task and relationship orientation wants to get the job done. But for people with relationship orientation, getting the relationship sorted at the start of the project is really important, like my Abu Dhabi clients. And it will help make the project run more smoothly. For those with task orientation, the work needs to be done. And it is in doing the work that the relationship will be built. Now, I will say this. There are people who will look at each of those, not you in the room perhaps, but there are people who say, well, that approach is wrong. That approach is wrong. Mine is right, yours is wrong. And I think it's really helpful to move away from what's right or wrong. Understanding difference, respecting difference, for me, is what unlocked my multicultural approach towards situations, people, traveling, and so on. Just saying, yes, difference is good. Diversity is good. Even if it seems difficult at first, understanding why the difference is there and the benefits it gives us are very helpful. I'll just dive into some of these post-it notes. More time to pay attention to the quality and the results will be more effective. That's a lovely note. That gives us a strong advantage there on the loose on the loose end of that spectrum. On the relationship end. Excuse me, I misspoke. Relationship brings people together. Task made sure relationships are achieved. Thank you. And there's a good one here. Task often ensures the task gets done from the get-go. However, the relationship driven will ensure that the team will improve their cooperation over time. Cooperation, understanding, rapport is in a situation I was in this morning. Rapport between two people who are very task focused can often be overlooked, and rapport is one of the vital ingredients in dealing with conflict. If you haven't started with relationship and you're focusing on the task and you run into conflict, that conflict is harder to resolve without rapport. There's 7 laws of influence. My favorite one is the law of liking. If you like someone, you're far more likely to go along with them on the journey they're asking you to. And when the project hits a rough spot, whatever project, and eventually every project has a more difficult time, trust and interdependence that's important to relationship-oriented people will bring the team together to find ways to overcome the challenge. The task-focused people will ensure that there is a determination to find those solutions. Again, balance, diversity of approach. So we've got some really interesting insights. We've got some tools. Let's move forward and have a look at another cultural intelligence approach to managing cultural difference. We've looked at the value of having different cultural preferences in a team, having people with different views, perspectives, backgrounds. It gives our team and projects insight that we couldn't access otherwise. However, we know it's not always that easy. Having a person with a loose orientation towards time will help maybe diffuse stress and stop you from rushing into solutions that can be better if more time is allocated. But when you have a strict deadline, you need to be tight oriented to get you going. In other words, sometimes you have to enforce one way of working, and other times there's time to co-create a process that's inclusive of all, styles and benefits included from the existing diversity within your team. Time is a big factor. Deadlines are a big factor. So how do we know how to approach difference in different situations? There is a culturally intelligent approach to managing cultural difference, and it's known simply as A, B, C, D, E. And let me share it for you right now. It's up on your screen. And let me unpack this for you. Each of the strategies listed here depends on a starting point of a basic level of cultural intelligence. In other words, they rely on the strategy being a conscious, deliberate decision to address cultural differences. You have to want to, you have to engage in the process. That's important. Can't fake it, you can't force it. Uncovering different cultural behaviors and values that exist in your team with a tool like World Prism is an essential first step before deciding on the best strategy. So let's have a look at the strategies. A is for adapt. It's the simplest and most frequent option. One person adjusts their style to the others, or as we say in the UK, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It's the simplest because it requires only one person to change. And because there's a clear goal, develop a style that's closer to their counterparts, that's fairly easy to do in many cases. In a complex team, it's a less effective strategy as the differences are more emphasized and there can be more differences. It works best in a one-to-one situation or where there's a significant power differential. For example, adapting your style to suit that of a key stakeholder or a customer. Max Flex, perfect one-to-one. Okay, let's have a look at B, blend. In a complex team, a better approach is blend. When we blend cultural approaches, one person, usually the team leader, identifies a desired culture, usually taking elements from the existing variety of approaches, the buffet approach, if I may think about food for a moment. It's a comprehensive solution. It retains the benefits of cognitive diversity and contrasting perspectives while trying to mitigate the potential chaos and frustrations of conflicting styles. Blend. How about C, co-create? This is a refinement of the blend strategy where the leader invites the team to agree collectively on team culture. Each individual actively contributes to defining and creating a new team culture. You've heard of corporate cultures. Why not create a team culture? It's, as long as the will is there, it's quite straightforward. It's very helpful because it defines the way we do things in this team. For a new team, this is a great way of building engagement and ownership of the culture. It creates conversations. It creates understanding and empathy, although it can take time to agree and requires a leader to be able to facilitate those discussions around potentially sensitive areas. So it needs good leadership. It requires cooperation. It requires a will. There's also the potential that the end result doesn't work for the team or the business, in which case the leader may revert to the blend option. Co-creating a culture gives you the best chance of the culture sticking. Then we're on to the fourth technique here, divide. Divide proposes that you just ignore the cultural differences and let each individual work as they prefer according to their cultural style. This is interesting. It can work for established or small teams or for teams that have very little interdependence on each other. A group of account managers, for example, may not need to collaborate with each other very often, so their cultural differences are not a barrier to working effectively. The risk in a team that does need to collaborate more closely is that the difference leads to conflict. Conflict's tricky. Disagreement becoming conflict is hard to undo. It also demoralizes. Demoralizing feuds, for example, over seemingly unimportant details can arise. In fact, the causes may not actually get diagnosed, and they might just fester in the background. And there you start creating quite a difficult environment. So number 5 is enforce. Sometimes the leader needs to just lay down the law and effectively say, this is the way it is going to be done. This is effective where the culture is mission critical. I mean, when I was in the military, that's how they did it. It was enforcement. It was one way. This is how you do it. It's very didactic. For example, in a dangerous situation, the building's on fire, get out. That's enforcement. That's an oversimplification, but you see where I'm going. Or where the team is only a very short-term grouping brought together for a specific purpose with a hard deadline. I worked in newsrooms a lot, and often you'd have journalists who didn't know each other working to a very tight deadline. I remember working on a number of big news events, and enforce was the way we did it. Everyone just said, yeah, we've got to get on with it in this situation. Short term, it's fine. The risk to longer term teams is that it can alienate and discourage individuals. It risks damaging inclusion and belonging. It's very linked to the concept of cultural fit. So this strategy should be used with caution. So as we start to close out our session, let's summarize. One of the best ways to achieve collaboration for cross-border working, well, let's give you 3 ideas: setting explicit expectations, creating shared ground, and sharing cultural preferences. One of the best ways to achieve this is by co-creating a team charter. A team charter establishes a foundation for how a group will work together. It documents and puts in one place the important information about the team. This includes team purpose, team operations and behaviors, and the expected outcomes. Creating it provides clarity and will help you to learn about your team members and put some structural boundaries around the group process. The exact form isn't important. Ensuring that everyone's involved in creating it is. Now, using Country Navigator's World Prism is also a really good way to bring out any potential blockers. In this masterclass learning path, we've shared a team charter you can download with your colleagues. We encourage you to look at it, try it. Finally, building a team charter, well, it's a great way to develop your culturally intelligent skills, essential team skills for cross-border working. 1, listening. Listening actively and attentively before making judgment is a valuable skill in every situation. But when across borders, it becomes crucial. The advice of grandparents around the world remains true. We've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. So we should listen twice as much as we talk. It's a great rule. I tell my children this all the time. It has variable success, but with adults, it can. Active listening followed by clarifying questions is a great toolkit. Curiosity. You need to put your cultural biases aside and be curious. Ask questions. Be interested. Be engaged. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't judge. Find out why, how, what. Be a journalist. That's why I like being a journalist. It encourages curiosity. And my son, who's 8, so curious. This is how he learns. Number 3, empathy. Empathy is the ability to sense each other's emotions and put yourself in their shoes. Cultural intelligence teaches us that empathy by looking for understanding and causes of other people's behavior. It's so powerful. You're more open to learning and building trust when you use empathy. And finally, flexibility. We don't need to adopt an inauthentic cultural style, but working across borders does ask for adaptability and flexibility. Flexibility also means accepting ambiguity as a sign that we still have more to understand and learn. We've recorded our session today, so you can go back and enjoy it again, perhaps share it with others. It's available on the platform, as are the resources we discussed throughout our session. The team charter is available. We can find out more about the Cultural Prism tools. And I'd like to say thank you for taking an hour out of your day. Luke's just given me a good reminder here. For inquiries to access the learning path or any support needed, email support@countrynavigator.com. The email's in chat right now. And Marianne's asking us to share the link to the team charter. Hopefully Luke can help you out with that. With the 10 seconds I have left, I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for your attention, for your focus, for your insight. And thank you for starting a journey of opening your mind and exploring your cultural intelligence. Until next time, my name is Andrew Wright. I'm here for Country Navigator. Thank you for joining us, and bye-bye.